So, welcome to my unwritten history of gender identity with relation to myself, Jocelyn McPherson. Some of you may remember me by my dead name or who I identified as before I became transgender, but what a lot of you don't know is probably the history behind my gender and sexual identity when I was growing up. I've already introduced a little insight into who I was born as, who I identified as for the longest time, and who I eventually found out I was earlier on this year. But my gender identity actually goes a little deeper than a lot of people would understand, and a lot of that I owe to the White Wolf's World of Darkness, which does have its own set of controversies, yes, but Vampire the Masquerade was one of my favorite games. But it wasn't Vampire the Masquerade that helped me identify who I was as a woman, largely because I played Vampire the Masquerade as a LARP, so cross-dressing wasn't my thing. It still isn't my thing. I now identify and feel comfortable in women's clothing because that's who I am. But back in the day, because I identified largely as a man, or was convinced so much by society that I was a man, that I felt uncomfortable even addressing that. No, the game that literally helped me identify as who I was as a woman, even though I didn't know it at the time, was actually Werewolf the Apocalypse, which is to date my favorite tabletop game in a long, for a long time. And one of the reasons being was when I first started playing, my first character was a child of Gaia, which eventually became disabled as a result of his actions, but still became one of the most effective theurges in the game, in the tabletop game that we were playing. So I managed as a character to overcome that disability, which in itself was an educational experience, even though practically it's really just a game, so I couldn't 100% identify with that disability. However, the second character that came across, because my previous character became too powerful, was a Black Fury. Now, for some of you who aren't familiar with the World of Warcraft, no, not World of Warcraft, World of Darkness game, the Werewolf the Apocalypse, is that the Black Furies are literally a tribe of women who have long since overcome, or still trying to overcome, the yoke of patriarchal rule over the feminine. And I played two Black Furies in the game, actually, but my first one was probably my most pronounced. Raina walks the dark path, and she was lesbian. She had a true love. She was lupus. She wasn't born human, so she kind of learned this human loving relationship over time. She was kind of blessed with quite a high amount of appearance when it came down to it. She had a marriage which gave her an appearance of 6, and the reason I played that was not because I wanted to be this sexy woman or anything like that, but because I wanted my storyteller at the time, who was really good at what he did, to make that powerful trait in appearance somewhat of its own disability. And as a result, Raina did deal with a lot of typical male reactions to an extremely attractive young woman. And her appearance was as much a detriment as it was a benefit, an advantage to her. Unfortunately, as a result of this, also, her pack would quite normally use her as kind of like the sexual bait when it came to certain elements of the game. But and yeah, as a Black Fury, I kind of objected to that an awful lot. But I'm kind of getting beside the point here. Raina Walks the Dark Path actually helped me connect to that feminine side that I've long been struggling with at the time, without actually knowing how much of an impact it actually had on my identity as a woman. And a lot of my female friends who are playing the game as well said I played just as good a woman as any woman character who played their characters as well. So I was pretty flattered by that. To me, Raina Walks the Dark Path is a very important aspect to my life as a fictional character that I created, and I think largely this kind of stems from the tremendous storytelling that our DM had at the time. He gave every player an opportunity to play their own story, to be their own character. There wasn't a particular favorite in the game that got a better deal or a worse deal than anybody else. He played it fair, he played it along the line, and it was a beautiful experience for me. And in many ways, if it wasn't for Raina Walks the Dark Path, I don't think I would be where I am right now. I wouldn't be questioning who I was and who I am and who it is I'm meant to be. A lot of people talk about how computer games either help them with their identities or how they play people of other identities. And I will admit, I was one of those Warcraft players who always played a female character, except once. I played a Tauren male, but every other character I had was female. And I don't know why. I felt really comfortable in that role, and every time I role-played them, it was always from what I felt was my feminine approach, my idea of what it was to be a woman was. Whether that's correct or not is down to debate, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that would like to debate, oh, she's just putting her masculine view on what femininity is, which it's an interesting debate to have. It's an interesting discussion to have, and I'm more than willing to have that. But in many ways, like I said, if it wasn't for Werewolf the Apocalypse, which in itself is a story about transformation, a story about change, a story about evolution, I don't think I could have been the person I identify as now, and I'm pretty happy with that. It kind of helps now, since I've come out of surgery, realizing, recognizing who I was born as opposed to who I was trained and taught to be by my family and by medical practitioners. It's kind of grounded me in many ways to deal with that identity as to not being one gender or the other, not being one sex or the other when I was born, and finally finding out that all these feelings, all these emotions, all these doubts that I had about who I was and who I was supposed to identify as actually came out to have purpose, actually came out to an almost satisfactory conclusion for me that I wasn't wrong thinking the way I am. I wasn't wrong being the way I am. I wasn't wrong for the decisions I made now. So that kind of helps. And again, I owe a lot to that particular game, Werewolf the Apocalypse, that helped me explore that feminine side of me in ways that I wasn't allowed to when I was younger, when I wasn't allowed to when I was a child, when I wasn't allowed to in typical conservative surroundings where people would tell me who I'm supposed to be as opposed to who I really am, and everything. And I'm quite happy with that. So yeah, this is unscripted. There's probably going to be more of that coming along. I think that when it comes to talking about my personal experience in this, in transitioning, an unscripted approach is probably a more personal approach, and I will get better at it as time goes along. Because in the last time the last few times I've done unscripted stuff, I'm always rambling away. But hopefully this is kind of short and concise and kind of gives you an idea of how gaming helped me connect with something that I was denied when I was a child, that helped me explore something that I kind of long suspected but never really dared break out of that shell. Because even back then when I was playing that game, I didn't even know that transgender people existed. I knew that gay people existed. I knew that cross-dressing existed. I knew that drag queens existed. But I didn't know that transgenderism was a thing. And we're talking about the late 1990s, early 2000s here, which kind of shows you how much I was exposed to in my early teens, in my 20s and stuff, and how much information was actually denied me at that time. If I'd have known earlier that this was a thing, I probably would have moved on and become become the person I am, rather than wait till I was nearly 50. So yeah, so Werewolf the Apocalypse saved my life. Can you believe it? Until next time, ladies and gentlemen. Ciao.